It was the 3rd day of October, 1888, in the Newtown district of Edinburgh, Scotland. Autumn had arrived without ceremony. The cobblestones of Stockbridge were dark with recent rain, and the smell of coal fires had settled low between the tenement rows, clinging to the washing still strung across the yards. Along Cheney Street, where working families paid their weekly rents in shillings and thought little of their neighbours' comings and goings, there was nothing to suggest that the day would be any different from the one before it. The residents of that street were laundresses, clerks, carters, and seamstresses. They rose before the light and worked until after it had gone. Children played in the close mouths and the back lanes when the weather permitted, as children in such districts always had, and nobody paid particular attention to who came and went from the rooms above the ground floor. Nobody kept a ledger of arrivals and departures. This was the nature of the neighbourhood, and it had served certain purposes very well indeed. What the boy found wedged behind that gate would not remain a private matter for long. Within the hour, the constabulary had been summoned. By evening, the name Jessie King would be spoken for the first time in the offices of the Edinburgh police. Jessie King was 27 years of age in the autumn of 1888. She had come originally from the Anderston district of Glasgow, the daughter of a labourer, and had arrived in Edinburgh some years prior, in the company of a man named Thomas Pearson, who was considerably older than she was, and worked intermittently as a plasterer. They were not married, though they presented themselves in the manner of a couple wherever they took lodgings, and they moved frequently. Their rooms were always modest. Their rent was always modest. Their lives, as observed by neighbours, appeared entirely unremarkable. By the summer of 1887, Jessie King had established a quiet arrangement that brought a small but steady additional income. She took in infants. It was not an uncommon practice in Victorian Scotland. Unmarried women who found themselves with a child faced circumstances of considerable severity. Employment was impossible to maintain with an infant to care for, and the workhouse represented a fate that most were determined to avoid. And so a network of private arrangement had grown up in the cities, whereby women, often themselves of the working poor, agreed to take in a child for a fee. The payment was typically a lump sum of several pounds, or a weekly allowance of a few shillings. The child would be cared for, and the mother might eventually return for it, or she might not. The practice was known, even then, as baby farming. Jessie King collected her first known infant in the autumn of 1887. The child was a boy, recently born, handed over by a young woman who could not keep him and who paid a sum of money for his care and future placement. Jessie received the child and the money. She provided assurances that were warm and sufficient. She signed nothing. The infant was seen by a neighbour on one occasion, carried briefly in Jessie's arms at the door of their lodgings in Anne's Court, Stockbridge. As he was noted to be wrapped in a white shawl, he was noted to be quiet. After that single morning, he was not seen again. Nothing more was thought of it. Children in such circumstances came and went. People did not ask. By the spring of 1888, Jessie King and Thomas Pearson had moved their lodgings twice. They were now residing at Cannon Mills, a short distance to the north and east of Stockbridge, where the water of Leith ran dark between its banks and the mills turned slowly in the early morning. Their new rooms were reached by a common stair, and their neighbours were as indifferent to their affairs as neighbours in such streets generally were. A second infant came to Jessie King in the spring of that year. This child was a girl, some months old, placed with her in similar circumstances to the first. A young woman, or unmarried, and in difficult employment, had sought a private arrangement. The fee was agreed upon. The child was delivered. Again there was no formal agreement, no document of any kind, no party beyond Jessie herself to witness the transaction. This infant, too, was seen once, by a woman on the common stair who noted her being carried upward wrapped in a dark cloth. By the following week the child was no longer present in the household. Jessie, when asked on one occasion where the baby had gone, replied that she had been placed with a family in the country. Her manner was easy and unhurried. The neighbour thought no more of it. Nothing more was thought of it. Thomas Pearson was aware of the arrangements. He was aware of the money. Whether he was aware of what had become of the children, the subsequent investigation would seek to determine. He maintained throughout that, he had given the matter little consideration, occupied as he was with his own irregular work. He paid the rent when he had the money to do so. He asked few questions. A third infant was accepted by Jessie King in the late summer of 1888. This child, another boy, was some weeks old at the time of the arrangement. His mother, a domestic servant named Catherine Gunn, paid a lump sum of £2 and was given every assurance that the child would be well cared for and properly placed. It was, by all external appearances, a transaction like any other. On the 3rd of October, 1888, a child playing in the passage off Cheney Street, Stockbridge, disturbed a bundle that had been wedged partially beneath a wooden gate at the close entrance of number 3. The bundle was covered in a piece of dark oilskin cloth, tied at one end. The child pulled at it and withdrew. His mother was summoned. She examined it briefly and sent at once for the nearest constable. Constable James Clark arrived at the passage at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. He knelt beside the bundle and made a preliminary examination without disturbing its contents further. It was evident that the cloth contained the body of an infant. The constable remained with the bundle, while a second officer was dispatched to the station at Stockbridge to inform the duty inspector. The passage was kept clear of residents. Detective Inspector Clark of Edinburgh City Police arrived within the hour. What items were observed and noted before anything was moved? The oilskin cloth, a length of cord wound about the neck of the bundle, and beneath the cloth, wrapped further in a piece of sacking, the body of a very young child. A male child, the inspector estimated, of several months of age. The cord about the neck of the cloth had been tied with some deliberateness. The body was removed to the mortuary at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. The passage and the gate were examined. No further evidence was recovered from the immediate scene. By evening, inquiries had begun along Cheney Street and the surrounding lanes. A woman on Cheney Street stated that she had observed a man, she believed it was a man, entering the passage earlier that same afternoon, carrying something beneath his arm. She could not describe him further. Another resident stated that she had seen nothing unusual. The following morning, the body of the child was formally examined by the police surgeon. It was a male infant. There were no marks of disease upon the body. There were marks, however, upon the neck. The examination was recorded, and the findings were sealed and forwarded to the detective inspector in charge of the inquiry. The investigation had begun in earnest. Dr. Henry Littlejohn, surgeon to the police of Edinburgh and medical officer of health for the city, conducted the post-mortem examination on the 4th of October, 1888. Dr. Littlejohn was among the most experienced forensic practitioners in Scotland, and his findings were recorded with characteristic precision. He observed that the infant was a male child, estimated to be between 3 and 5 months of age at the time of death. The child was adequately nourished and showed no signs of disease or natural infirmity. The cause of death, in Dr. Littlejohn's formal opinion, was asphyxia. He determined that pressure had been applied to the throat by means of a ligature and that death had not been instantaneous. He stated further that the injuries to the neck were consistent with manual strangulation in conjunction with the application of the cord recovered from the oilskin wrapping. The child had not died in the passage off Cheney Street. He had died elsewhere, some hours before the bundle was deposited. It was clear, Dr. Littlejohn stated, that the manner of disposal had been deliberate. Detective Inspector Clark directed inquiries toward the area of Stockbridge and Cannon Mills, concentrating upon households known to take in infants for private arrangement. Within 2 days, an informant, a neighbour from a previous lodging, had provided a name. The name was Jessie King. Inquiries established that Jessie King and Thomas Pearson had recently vacated rooms at Cannon Mills and were now residing at Cheney Street itself, at number 24, on the upper floor, a short distance from where the bundle had been discovered. Officers attended the address on the 5th of October. The rooms were inspected. Upon examination of the premises, a second bundle was discovered concealed beneath a heap of sacking near the stair. It contained the body of a second infant, a female child. If you are finding this case as compelling as we do, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us continue researching and bringing these forgotten histories to your attention. We read every comment, and we are grateful for each one. Now, let us continue with the investigation as it stood in October of 1888. Jessie King was apprehended at the address on the 5th of October, 1888. She did not resist. Thomas Pearson was taken into custody at the same time, though he was subsequently released pending further inquiry. The remains of both children were conveyed to the mortuary. The items found in the rooms, a feeding bottle, lengths of cord, a quantity of oilskin cloth, and several articles of infant clothing, were set aside on the table and catalogued. Jessie King was formally charged with murder and remanded to custody at Calton Jail. The date for the preliminary hearing was set. The trial of Jessie King opened on the 18th of February 1889 before the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. The presiding judge was Lord Young. The courtroom in the old Parliament House, with its hammer-beam roof of dark oak and its narrow galleries above the public benches, was full from the first morning. Admission was, in practice, difficult to obtain, and those who had secured places arrived early and did not leave during the adjournments. The Crown was represented by the Lord Advocate, who presented the case with the measured efficiency that serious charges before that court required. The charge was wilful murder, specifically the murder of the 3 infants identified in the course of the investigation: Walter Campbell, the first child placed with the accused; Violet Tomlinson, the second; and Alexander Gunn, son of the domestic servant Catherine Gunn, whose body had been found in Cheney Street Passage. Dr. Littlejohn gave evidence on the second day. His testimony was formal, precise, and uncontested by the defence. He stated his findings as to cause of death, distinguished between the cases as the evidence permitted, and answered questions from both sides with the composure of a man accustomed to the ordeal of the witness box. Catherine Gunn gave evidence regarding the placement of her son. She stated the sum paid, the assurances given, and the fact that she had received no communication of any kind from the accused following the transaction. She wept once, quietly, and was not pressed further. The defence offered what it could, which was limited. The accused was represented by counsel who argued, briefly, that the evidence of intent was circumstantial, and that the jury must be satisfied beyond doubt. He was not persuasive. Jessie King was not called to give evidence on her own behalf. She sat throughout the proceedings in a plain dark dress, her hands folded, her expression giving nothing to those who watched her from the gallery above. The jury retired after the conclusion of the Lord Advocate's address. After 18 minutes they returned. The verdict was guilty. Lord Young pronounced the sentence of death. The date of execution was set for the 11th of March, 1889. Jessie King received the sentence without visible expression, so the courtroom was cleared. The Scotsman reported the verdict the following morning in a column of careful prose that described the proceedings as having reached their inevitable conclusion. The paper noted that the public galleries had been occupied throughout by persons of various stations, and that the accused had maintained throughout a composure that the writer found, in his words, difficult to reconcile with the gravity of the charges proved against her. Other papers were rather less restrained. The Edinburgh Evening News used words that the record does not now repeat, and the correspondents of the popular press wrote at length about the practice of baby farming and the particular horrors that attended it when conducted by persons of Jessie King's disposition. There were those who wrote to the papers to observe that the practice itself had been permitted to flourish in the absence of adequate legislation. The Infant Life Protection Act of 1872 had been passed with the intention of preventing precisely such arrangements, requiring the registration of any person taking in more than one infant for reward. The Act, however, had been inconsistently applied and was widely understood to be insufficient. Jessie King had operated within the gaps of that legislation without difficulty and without detection for more than a year. The execution took place at Calton Jail on the morning of the 11th of March, 1889. It was carried out within the prison walls without public audience, in accordance with the practice that had been established by legislation some years prior. The hangman was Berry. The morning was cold, with a pale sky over the Calton Hill, and the crows that nested in the old trees along the jail wall made their noise and settled again. The operation lasted a few seconds. It was noted in the formal record as having been conducted without complication. The bell of the prison was not rung. Thomas Pearson, against whom charges had not been sustained, returned to his work. He left Edinburgh within the year. The record does not follow him further. In the aftermath of the case, correspondence passed between the offices of the Scottish Office and the relevant municipal authorities regarding the enforcement of the infant life protection legislation. Several recommendations were made. Some were acted upon. The practice of unregistered baby farming did not cease immediately, but the King case was cited for some years afterward as evidence of the dangers attendant upon inadequate oversight of private infant arrangements. The rooms at Cheney Street were re-let. The passage off Cheney Street remained a passage used by children playing and by residents going about their ordinary business. The gate beside which the bundle had been found was repaired at some point, the record does not say when, and painted over. The names of Walter Campbell, Violet Tomlinson, and Alexander Gunn do not appear in the monument books of Edinburgh. They are recorded in the case papers, bound now in the archives, in ink that has faded to the colour of old water. The Calton Hill still rises above the city. In the early mornings, when the mist comes in from the Forth and settles between the tenement rows, the streets of Stockbridge look very much as they always have. The closes are quiet. The gates are shut. Behind the windows, kettles boil and doors close softly, and beyond that, only silence.